Mark tells us that he was rich. Matthew says he was young. And Luke says that he was a ruler. Probably some small, insignificant civil servant. It's called the story of the parable of the rich young ruler. And since it is recorded by all three of those gospel writers, it probably did in fact occur much as it is reported. I've come to the conclusion over long years of preaching and reading sermons and books about sermons that there are two basic mistakes usually associated with this parable. Mistake number one is that it's about money. And mistake number two is it's not about money. It's about a lot more than money. Mark tells us Jesus was traveling toward Jerusalem, traveling toward that ultimate showdown that was to take place. He was trying to teach his disciples what it meant to be a servant leader, following the footsteps of a Messiah whose value system was one not of renunciation of the world, but a value system that includes in the world. So that is one of the first clues that, at least in part, this is about money. But only in part. There's no question that Jesus had a special feeling for the poor, a special fondness. That fondness, however, was not based on the belief that poverty is a virtue, but rather that the poor are better able to face their essential dependency. When you're wealthy or financially comfortable, as we like to say, nobody wants to admit they're wealthy. But being financially comfortable is okay. We who are financially comfortable are prone to say that we are not dependent, and that we don't want to be dependent. That it's easier to avoid one's essential dependence. We grow up believing that one of our basic goals in life is becoming independent. Relying on no one. As far as I can tell, those who attain that goal are usually pretty miserably lonely. Think about it. Jesus did not condemn wealth per se. He had wealthy followers. There was Matthew, for instance. Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors were wealthy. They got wealthy by skimming money off the top. I suspect it is not a dead art. He came to Jesus under the cover of darkness so that he would not be recognized. And Jesus told him to give his money to the poor. But then he told him something much more important. That you had to be born again. He never once told him to divest yourself of your wealth. Only you must be born again. So he never condemns wealth per se. What he does say that you must be is born again. So the young man comes to him asking an essential question. what must I do to be saved? Saved from what? He never says. What must I do to be saved? You must be born again. So the second thing about this parable is, on the one hand, it's not exclusively about money, and on the other hand, it is about money. And being born again is a link between the two. Jesus did not avoid the wealthy. He ate dinner with them. Remember the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who was a little man, short of stature. He wanted to see Jesus, but to do so he had to climb a tree, see over the crowd. Jesus saw him, a little man in a tree. Told him to come down because he was going to eat dinner with him. We were told that Zacchaeus was wealthy. Never once did Jesus tell him to divest himself of his wealth. So what is the story of the rich young ruler about? If it's not about money, or exclusively about money, what about giving up being in charge? Being in charge. Jesus says you have to be born again. The young man's question about what he must do to inherit eternal life carries that implication that it's all on me. It's the monkey on my back. And Jesus says it's not. But we all grew up to some extent with that notion. My father used to tell me that whatever I got in life, I would have to work for, just as he had. Willie Loman is the young salesman in Death of a Salesman. He's given some advice about how to make his way in the world, his uncle tells him. He says, Willie, it's a jungle out there. You've got to be hard, Willie. You've got to be hard. We've all heard it, along with that other saying, there is no such thing as a free lunch. I'm not sure what your definition of eternal life is, but I do know that it appears 44 times in the New Testament. Jesus talked a lot about it. It has to do with one's relationship with God and how that affects the quality of one's life. Now, if your life is transformed, then you have some inkling of what this is all about. And so that's the second clue. If the first is the story of the rich young ruler is not exclusively about money, the second is that it is, to some degree, about money. But more importantly, it's about relationships. And about to whom do you belong. Now I'm here to tell you, you can't earn the relationship. You cannot earn the relationship. You can't earn it any more than you can make somebody fall in love with you. Or you can change the color of your hair, the way you speak. You can go to the cosmetic counter and get done over again. But you can't make someone fall in love with you. The rich young ruler discovered that, and that's why he was kneeling at Jesus' feet, asking about eternal life. And Jesus says, what does the law say? And he recites, you don't kill, you don't commit adultery, you don't take what doesn't belong to you. All of those things that are spelled out very clearly in those commandments. He said, almost mournfully, but I've done all that. I've kept the commandments. I'm not a bad person. But sometimes there is that feeling that something is missing. An emptiness, if you will. That God has created some sort of restlessness within us. That feeling our hearts are restless until they rest in you. It's what Augustine talked about. And our hearts will not be still until they rest in the one called Father. And what the young man in this story found out was he couldn't make it happen. He couldn't make it happen. Mark tells us that Jesus looked at the young man, not just at his expensive clothes or the jewelry he was wearing or that fine donkey he was riding. He looked at him in a deeper way. And what he saw was a longing, a desperation. And Mark said, he loved him. He loved him. He's one of the few in all of the Gospels that it is clearly said in that encounter, Jesus' reaction. Somebody who had fallen social to someone whose heart was so restless that he loved him. That's the clue that this is a story about a lot more than money. That it's a story about loving. It's a story about a relationship that you can't buy. A relationship that is only a gift. All you can do is accept it. That's it. When someone gives you a gift, you're told, accept it. Hold it in your hand. Say thank you. The problem is, to accept a gift, your hand has got to be empty. You can't clutch your hands full of things and accept a gift. There's no room for that gift. The reason the young man went away sorrowful, we are told, that he couldn't unencumber himself. He couldn't get his hands empty enough to accept the gift. All of the disciples left something. They had to put aside something. Whether it was a fishing line or collecting taxes, they all had to get to the point where they could accept the gift. But understand that the love comes first. We're told that the young man went away sorrowful, that he couldn't divest himself, he couldn't get his hands empty. This is the only person in the New Testament, the only one in the Gospels, who walks away sorrowful when offered the gift. But when we are able to accept the gift, the value of everything else changes. Years ago, in my first parish, in a small town in West Georgia, a college town, I met a young man. Actually, he wasn't. He was pretty much near my age at the time. He had grown up in the shadow of his father. His father ruled the house. He ruled his son. The dream was that he was building a business and his son would be in the business with him, but he would always be the father and the boy would always be the son. The father was always the president of the company. A mutual friend introduced us. It was obvious that he was not very happy with a lot of things. The young man started coming to my parish. We had, at that time, hanging on a wall there, a framed quote. It is from 2 Timothy. It reads, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear. The young man wrestled with his introduction to the gospel, to a community that he found supportive, loving, in which he was taking at face value. Not for what he had or where he belonged, but who he was. He recounted for me an episode that took place one day. He had handled an order from a client. His father came in holding the order in his hand, unhappy about how he had handled it. And the young man said, I told my father that if he wanted to handle the orders, fine. But if I was going to do it, I would do it my way. And he said, in that exchange, the whole relationship changed. And his life changed. He became a new person in very many ways. And he was grateful for that. He would eventually be a senior warden for me. In that town and in that church, it was a college town. West Georgia was moving from being a 2-year teacher college to a full part of the university system. And I became the first clergy person to work with the students. Actually taught part-time. It was a wonderful life. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I had a vision that the church could be more and do more, and that vision was to have a center where students could come, where they could come and learn about the gospel, where they could come and enjoy themselves. That sort of thing costs money. Went to the diocese. They said, if you get the money, let us know. Went to the national church, and they said, if you get the property, we'll help you renovate it. And we set out to do it. The young man I just told you about, my contemporary, came to my office one day and he said, over the years, I have gotten so many calls from people, clients of ours, who have asked us to support various and sundry things, and we have always made a donation. He said, I had an idea about the 2 houses you have found adjacent to the church, the property that you want to turn into a student center. He said, what will the bank do? I said, I have no idea. He said, I do. I think if you have enough for a start, that they'll lend you the money. He said, I sat down and made a list of all the people who have asked us for contributions over the years. He said, I either called or wrote every one of them. And this is what I got. He started turning his pockets out. Some were big bills. Most of it smaller denominations. But he laid $13,400 on my desk and said, I'll go to the bank with you. That student center is still there, filled with students. Seems to me that's a parable in and of itself. Someone who is set free and what they can do.